What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, May 3rd, 2016. We're getting into the week here, off to a much smoother start than our program yesterday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan is sitting in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note. Today, our third-hour radio guest will be John Brakey. He is the lawyer down in Arizona, or actually he's the plaintiff in this Arizona vote fraud lawsuit, and he's going to be filling us in on all the dastardly shenanigans that have been going on down there and unfortunately seem to be happening all across the country. Today, all eyes are on Indiana, the Hoosier State, basketball heaven, and the polls are open. They'll be closing just about the same time our show is over today. And right now, the latest polls going into this, Donald Trump is at 56%. Ted Cruz at 22%. He's doubled his lead just in the last 24 hours. Kasich is at 14%, and 7% still hadn't made up their mind. So it looks like this is going to be a major Trump victory. This could cement Trump and Hillary as the candidates going into November. Now, I stress could, because Cruz's strategy is to force a contested convention, which he has imagined in his fevered brain is going to kick out the most popular GOP candidate and turn the nomination over to a man who is constitutionally ineligible to run for the office. The other news is that Bernie Sanders is doing well enough where the Democrats may have a contested convention. That would be an historical first, both parties having contested conventions. All right, Trump and Cruz are out there fighting a war of words. Cruz is out there screaming that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. He dresses funny, his hair is fake, he tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting, and any other nasty thing that he can think of. But it is becoming obvious to a lot of people. Indiana is the last stand of the Dump Trump cartel. And so if anybody from the Donald Trump campaign is listening, I have two things. First of all, Donald, wear your Kevlar. Remember what happened to Robert Kennedy when he started winning all those primaries. And two, call into the show sometime. Just say hello, 800-313-9443. Now, there is a story, this came out of Breitbart, about how Indiana has shattered previous records for early voter turnout. Now, that could be a good thing, showing tremendous interest in this primary. It could also be a bad thing, because it's in mailing ballots and early balloting that the fraud will take place. And we know Ted Cruz is desperate. And we know that there has been massive election fraud already taking place this season. It's not going to stop now, just because we're all paying attention. Apparently, Glenn Beck is out there saying that Ted Cruz has been sent by God to rule over us. Well, first of all, there's that issue that nobody goes with theocracies anymore, at least on this half of the globe. There is that First Amendment saying that there is no state religion over this, and if God wanted Ted Cruz to be president of the United States of America, why did he have him born up in Canada? Kind of a little silly situation there. Now, the polls are also showing Trump pulling ahead of Hillary Clinton. All along, all during this campaign, the word coming out from Hillary and her supporters is, oh, I'm going to just beat Donald Trump. I'm afraid of, Ben Carson. I hope I don't have to run against Ben Carson, but I'll just devour Donald Trump, which never made sense. This idea that the strongest GOP candidate with the most public support was somehow going to be easier for the Democratic nominee to defeat. And again, Hillary Clinton was playing Richard Nixon's strategy from his reelection. Engineer the opposition to run against a candidate you know you can beat. Ben Carson, John Kasich, Ted Cruz. Hillary has always been afraid of Donald Trump. and now she has reason to be. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. Randy in Texas. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, not much. Decided to follow you over to RBN.
Well, thank you.
Anyway, talking about Trump, I mean, he literally scares the bejesus out of some of these people over there in the Republican Party.
Good. They need a good scare.
Oh, I know it. And the thing is that, did you see that little bit that Ted Cruz did with the Trump supporters?
The one where the Trump supporter told Ted Cruz it's time for him to drop out?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious.
Well,
he's kind of, Ted Cruz has kind of turned into the Rodney Dangerfield of this election.
Yeah, he really has. But in his own mind, he still thinks he's got a shot. The only way he's going to get the GOP nomination now is for somebody to shoot Donald Trump off the podium, and I'm sure more than a few people are willing to do it.
Oh yeah, that's one thing that worries me about this whole thing is that I know Trump's got, which we've discussed before, he's got his own security and the Secret Service around him, so at least he's got a couple of extra layers of security. Plus, he does wear bulletproof vest.
Mm-hmm. And there isn't a round made that could get through that hair.
No. I'd just be worried about a sniper round through the eyeball.
Yeah. Well, no, it can't be a sniper. That'd be too obvious. They're going to set some patsy up like they did Sirhan. Oh, it's a Palestinian killed the kid, and they'll try and do something like that. But Donald Trump is very wise to have his own security. He's very wise to have his own security inside the Secret Service detail. I want to see him in the White House, but we know the reality of political history. Donald Trump is a threat to so many varied interests. He's a threat to Israel. He's a threat to the war machine. He's a threat to the neocons. He's a threat to Wall Street. He's actually, before even getting into the White House, succeeded in making more enemies than John F. Kennedy had.
Yep, and I know he's basically made an enemy of Hillary Clinton with his willingness to talk about some of her dirty laundry.
Absolutely. And the Clintons play for keeps. And when Trump wins the White House, if he's really going to go after the Clintons, I'm going to send in a resume. I want a job on that group.
Okay. Could I ask you a personal question?
You can ask.
Okay. Why did you decide to move over to RBN? I was just curious.
I just felt it was the time for a change. Mostly it was, getting out from underneath Alex Jones' shadow. And, John and I, we've been talking for months and months and months, and it just seemed like it had been a better fit. Basically, the reason I left RBN the last time had to do with an individual who is no longer with the organization, and that's about as far as I'm going to go on that subject.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, you have a great day, and I will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Out in California, the news is also good for Donald Trump. He's now up by 34 points. Now, all of this delegate math that we've been hearing about, where, Trump can't make that 1,247 delegates he needs, is all based on predicting the outcome of the remaining primaries. But the numbers are changing. Trump's momentum is building. If he does really well in Indiana, and it's looking like he will, then you're going to see the subsequent states swing more his way. Ted Cruz is on the wane with all of his screaming about God and marital aids and all of his scandals, and the growing public awareness that he is constitutionally ineligible to run for the White House. In fact, it's questionable whether he should have even been allowed in the Senate. So, Cruz is definitely in serious, serious trouble. That little agreement with Kasich to divvy up the states to make sure that Trump doesn't get a first ballot victory so the GOP leadership can kick him out, that backfired because the American citizen has a natural sense of fair play and honesty. and they're looking at this party machinery, trying to hijack the whole democratic process. And we know what party machines mean: tyranny and dictatorship. Look at the former Soviet Union. Look at the Nazis. And that's basically what the American people are upset about. And I'll tell you this, if it goes to a contested convention and Trump is kicked out, the GOP leadership might as well pack up and go home. They've not only handed the White House to Hillary Clinton, they will have destroyed their own party, and we will be a one-party nation just like the former Soviet Union. That's what's at stake. And if the GOP leadership are willing to turn us into the new Soviet Union just because they don't want Donald Trump to invade their little social clique, well, they deserve everything that's going to be happening to them. Now, a lot of people are saying if the rate of change in the future primary states continues, then Trump will get that first ballot win. It's still very much up in the air. Now, a lot of people have been talking about Donald Trump's foreign policy speech that he made the other day. And a lot of people liked it, especially those of us who think that we should be worried about problems here at home and let the rest of the world take care of itself. Of course, for the interventionists and the war hawks and the neocons, Donald Trump he's running up the white flag. He's refusing to recognize America's position in the world as the champion of whatever it is we're supposed to be champions of. But the reality is you can't be invading all these countries across the globe, impoverishing our nation, claiming that you're bringing democracy to these other nations when clearly democracy is in serious, serious trouble here at home. It's under attack by the party machines. If we don't have a functioning democracy here, we have no right to invade somebody else's nation on the premise that we are bringing them democracy. But the reality is, if you go back and you look at the Project for the New American Century and their policy papers, they make Donald Trump sound like an absolute 1960s peacenik. Because the neocons, the Project for the New American Century, they actually said, we need 100 years of endless war by the United States on the rest of the world to make them do what we think they should do. That was their agenda, and they were in control of the Bush White House. Now they want to get back into power. They may do it with Hillary, in which case they're going to have to change their name, their banner, their branding from neocon to neolib. But it's all the same people. It's all the same war machine. America's greatness is through war and conquest. Now, last week, Barack Obama announced that he was going to authorize the construction of a much taller, sturdier wall around the White House complex because of a couple of recent security intrusions, which may have been allowed to happen simply to justify the building of another wall around the White House. I don't know if you've been watching. It's been a very, very slow process over the last couple of administrations. But the White House, which used to be kind of out there, the people's house, everybody could see it, it's being slowly walled off. First of all, they closed off Pennsylvania Avenue. It's a pedestrian area only. They're putting up more fences, more walls, digging new bunkers underneath. Most people who visit the White House don't realize it, but that's not the original White House sitting on there. I think there's one corner of an outside wall that actually goes back to the original presidential manor of John Adams. Everything else has been rebuilt time and time and time and time again, with all the new improvements and scanners and the rest of it. So Donald Trump is out there poking fun at Obama over this wall because Obama has been taking Trump to task about wanting to build a wall on the Mexican border. Walls are bad. Walls are divisive. Walls are racist. Here, what about the wall around the White House? Well, I'm special. I deserve a wall. The American people don't deserve a wall to protect them from all these criminals and contagious people coming in. But I'm the president. I get a wall. Walls are signs of the elect and the elite. Now, another sign that Ted Cruz is struggling is he went on the Jim Bakker show, the televangelist. And Bakker basically ripped into him about his image as a devout Christian in light of his extramarital affairs and his wife Heidi's ties to the Council on Foreign Relations and other globalist organizations. and for Cruz's support of interventionism by the U.S. in places like Ukraine. And if you're a Christian and you're getting slammed on Jim Bakker's show, you know it's over. You have lost that demographic. Now, swinging on over to Hillary Clinton, she is openly admitting, indeed bragging, as if she thinks it's a good thing, that if she is president, she is going to support any legislation that will kill the gun industry. Her rationale is, we're not going to end the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. We're simply going to drive all the people out of business you would buy those guns from. So, see, you still have a right to keep and bear arms. There's just no gun stores and no gun factories anymore. Which leaves those of us who actually know how to make guns feeling rather smug. All righty, Clinton is once again refusing to release the transcripts of her speeches to all these various Wall Street money junkies who are pouring money all over her, and is laughing at Bernie Sanders' claim to still be in the running. And actually he is. Hillary is still relying on the superdelegates, but we're already hearing some of those superdelegates may be getting cold feet now that it's out that this Hillary PAC bought and paid for the superdelegates. That's not sitting too well with them. We're hearing rumblings of discontent and strivings for independence here. Now, a big problem Hillary is facing right now has to do with those states that are providers of coal. Because not too long ago, when she was riding high on the human caused global warming bandwagon, she was out there saying that we've got to put coal out of business. Now she's making speeches in coal country about we're here to revive the coal industry. And everybody's saying, excuse me, 1 minute, ma'am. But you just did a complete about face. And Hillary said, oh, it's not an about face. It's a refinement of my earlier position. No, it isn't. It's a complete about face. You were either lying then or you're lying now. Take your pick. Now, over at WorldNet Daily, they ran another one of these compilations of Hillary Clinton's scandals. I don't think anybody's got a complete list yet, but they've got 22 of them. 22 of the best, including Chinagate, the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, Travelgate, the cattle futures, and on and on and on. And you need to find all of these articles about Hillary's and Bill's crimes, and you need to flood your social media with them, because they were a criminal couple as in the governor's mansion in Little Rock. They were a criminal couple in the White House back in the 1990s, and they're going to be a criminal couple back in that White House yet again. Do you know when they left the White House, they actually stole a bunch of the furniture? That stuff doesn't belong to the president. That's the property of the government. They were forced to return it, and Hillary was just throwing a temper. What do you mean I can't take things from the White House? This is our White House. This is my country. Over in Virginia, Republicans are getting ready to sue the governor over his recent signing of an order to allow felons to vote. Now, under U.S. law, only legal U.S. citizens who have not been convicted of a felony are entitled to vote. Everybody else has to sit home. And we have all these illegals pouring in who are going to be encouraged to vote Democratic. And in Virginia, the governor's saying, yeah, we'll let all these felons vote. Who are the felons going to vote for? The biggest criminals they can find. So, we'll be keeping an eye on the race here. Even the We Hate Donald Trump network is out there talking about Hillary Clinton facing that backlash of her conflicting statements to the coal industry. So when we come on back to the show after this next commercial break, we're going to be getting into the war zones. There's a lot going on out there that the establishment media is trying to pretend isn't really all that interesting compared to Ted Cruz and Donald Trump screaming at each other and Hillary Clinton cackling ceaselessly in nervous stress. So when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the war zones because there's a lot of stuff going on. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get to the war zones, this story just came in from News Syscont. We're actually starting to see some of the sort of edges of the corporate media address this issue of Ted Cruz's citizenship. Now, up in Washington, D.C., law professor Victor Williams, who tried to file a lawsuit to block Ted Cruz, and it was thrown out of court by a judge who actually refused to look at the documentation. And the judge's excuse was, well, I don't know what natural born means, so yeah, Cruz can be on the ballot, which I think is grounds to have the judge removed from the bench and then disbarred. But this story is talking about how word of Cruz's ineligibility under the Constitution is spreading. Now, remember, under that Constitution, there's two things that are germane to this discussion. First of all, the courts are not given exclusive jurisdiction to interpret that Constitution. You have an equal right to read that Constitution and decide for yourself what it means, including what natural born means. Second, natural born in the Constitution was defined by the Law of Nations, a international legal document that was cited as a reference by the people who wrote that Constitution. So we know there is a definition. We know the definition they were using. And Ted Cruz is ineligible. And Americans still want that Constitution. They know the government wants to get rid of it. They're hanging on to it. That Constitution is what protects the people from the government. That's why the government wants to get rid of it. Now, as far as Ted Cruz and his backers, they're ready to throw the Constitution into the shredder. Ted Cruz is going to do anything to get that Oval Office. And there is a warning sign. Because if you have somebody who will do anything to become the president, they'll do anything once they are the president. This is a person operating without any restraint whatsoever in terms of his actions. Even Cruz's wife called him an immigrant the other day. And according to this article, some of Ted Cruz's pledged delegates who have actually looked at the information and the letter of the law and the Constitution, they're now saying, I can't support you. I can't vote for you at the convention. You are not eligible. So, all righty, getting back to the war zones here. Oh, wait a minute. We got a caller on the line. Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Mike, and congratulations to your new hangout.
Yes.
Yes. I want to talk, I saw an article on your website, and it was about European Army. And when you look, all the people that come from Syria to the Netherlands, not only to the Netherlands, but to Germany, to other places, and you see European Army. I said to some people, that is the army in the future, and they make propaganda, of course, to brainwash them, and then to attack Russia. And that is exactly what it is. And I knew exactly when I heard, okay, so many refugees, they're coming in.
Okay, well, Errol, I hate to interrupt you, but we're about to hit a commercial break. I want to get a comment in here. Certainly, yes, they're trying to build up a military force so that World War III is going to be fought in Europe again, much to the annoyance of the Europeans. But there's another aspect. We're looking at a probable Brexit coming up in the summer. We're hearing talk of a Frexit, a Drexit, a Grexit, and the European Union is coming apart. So what they're trying to do is rush and quickly form a national, or a European army to try and hold it all together. So that when a country says, I don't want to be part of this anymore, the army of Europe will march on in and slap upside of the head and say, no, you are slaves of the European Central Bank and you will stay slaves of the European Central Bank.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. And I think their agenda, because an agenda has time, and there's a time span. And I see exactly that, what you're saying, it is all falling apart.
Yes.
And it is beautiful to see.
Well, the problem is when they set up the European Union, it had a built-in self-destruct mechanism called the European Central Bank. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Errol. We'll be back after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now we're going to get into the war zones. Earlier today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced there was a deal to basically bring about a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities in Aleppo. And he said it's going to happen in a couple of hours. Well, the best laid plans of mice and men and foreign ministers gang after glee. And Free Syrian Army mercenaries, who we all know are working for the United States of America, bombed a hospital in Syria. And that, of course, immediately killed any possibility of a cessation of hostilities, as it was intended to do. Now, there's a very interesting article coming on out from returnofkings.com, 4 reasons why Assad must win the Syrian war. And they're not just talking about he wants to keep his job. What they're talking about is that if the U.S. succeeds in ejecting yet another democratically elected government from a Middle Eastern nation, it will plunge into chaos, as we have seen in Yemen and Libya and up in Ukraine, because the U.S. is really good at starting these overthrows, but they're not very good on the follow-through. And that's another reason why the U.S. is ultimately going to lose this whole agenda of dollarizing the resource-rich areas of the world. They're not able to close the deal. Now, as you know, over the weekend, Muqtada al-Sadr staged a peaceful incursion into the Green Zone in Baghdad, Iraq, and took over the Parliament building. The parliamentarians apparently ran. Some of them apparently were reported to have gone to the U.S. consulate saying, "Save me, save me, save me, get me the heck out of here." The U.S. is now officially denying that that happened. And then Muqtada al-Sadr told all his people, "We've made our point. We're going to leave and go home peacefully," which is what happened. Zero coverage on the American corporate news. Probably because it was looking like the run-up to a repeat of Tehran in 1979. And that was al-Sadr's message. That the government in Baghdad is not serving Iraq. It is not serving the Iraqi people. It is an installed U.S. puppet regime. And like all installed U.S. puppet regimes, it is loaded top to bottom with highly corrupt people who think this sort of behavior is acceptable. And al-Sadr is sending a message. You can go on being the government as long as you start being the government of Iraq and not just be in charge of looting the place on behalf of the United States of America. So the ball is in the Iraq Parliament's court to see what's going to happen. But al-Sadr has basically demonstrated that if push comes to shove, they can and will eject the Iraqi government from Baghdad. I think the only reason that al-Sadr did not go all the way with it this time was the realization that the United States of America would stage a false flag attack of some kind and say, "Oh, Iraq has attacked us. They've flown jets into buildings. They blew up the USS Liberty, and we've got to go." And there'd be another U.S. Army inside Iraq. And, of course, the whole point of the exercise is they want the U.S. out of their country, which is becoming a very common feeling all over the world, where the U.S. has their little military bases garrisoning countries to make sure they remain obedient. They want the U.S. forces out. The Yemen people want the U.S. forces and puppet government out. In this case, it's the Saudi Arabia is acting as a proxy. Same thing in Libya. The Syrian government want the U.S. forces out. They do not have the permission of the Syrian government to be there. Yankee go home is coming back into vogue. Now, the one place the U.S. is pulling their troops out of, and this strikes me as very strange, they're yanking their troops from the Sinai, supposedly because they've got word of an impending Egyptian coup, yet another one. Now, remember, they were the first coup, Walk Like an Egyptian. They kicked out the U.S.-friendly, Israeli-compliant Mubarak, and they put in, I'm actually forgetting the name of the guy who put in there. Then there was a counter coup by covert U.S. forces to get the current leadership in. Well, the people of Egypt are tired of U.S. puppet rule, and so now there's going to be a counter coup to maybe kick him out. And I am trying to figure out, why is the U.S. pulling their forces out from the Sinai unless Israel is planning on using the coming turmoil and chaos inside Egypt to grab the Sinai yet again. That's what I think is getting ready to happen. It doesn't make sense for the U.S. to pull their troops out of the Sinai. Whatever's going to happen in terms of a coup inside Egypt is not going to be reaching to the Sinai. And we know right now Israel has they've gone grabby. They're trying to grab the Golan. They're trying to grab more of the West Bank. They've grabbed the Sinai before. Were forced to give it back. Israel doesn't like to give things back. So I have a feeling we may see a move by Israel into the Sinai when the Egyptian coup begins. Now, as our caller was mentioning before, Germany is pushing for a European army. In other words, an army that wears the livery of the European Union and is not aligned with any of the member nations. And yes, it's a unified force to throw against the Russians, but I think the reason they're pushing for it is they're trying to counter all of this talk of exit from the European Union by creating a single European army that is not answerable to any one of the member nations. To basically go on in and say, no, you can't leave. We're telling you you can't leave. Same thing the North did to the Confederacy. You're not allowed to leave. We got you. You're our slaves forever. Now, there's another article coming out here from Journal Neo about Korea, and it's questioning the Western media tone, because we're always hearing about North Korea and South Korea as if they're two separate countries, and they aren't. It's one country with a demarcation line. And it was only a few years ago the North and South Korea were talking about reunification the way Germany had done. And then the U.S. goes on in there and stirs up a bunch of trouble, and we're back to North Korea and South Korea glaring at each other over the DMZ. The U.S. loves chaos. The U.S. loves war. The bankers love war and turmoil. They make far more money during times of war than in times of peace. Now, over in the Philippines, there's been another video of another beheading, this of a Canadian. I'm not sure why they weren't the Canadians to invade the Philippines. And as always, it was released by Site Intelligence Group, another fine Rita Katz production, because a lot of the videos that these people have put on out to support the U.S. narrative about bad ISIS and bad Al-Qaeda have been exposed as special effects frauds. Remember, Rita Katz's father was executed as an Israeli spy. Site Intelligence is tied in very tightly both with Mossad and CIA. It's a propaganda outfit. Anytime the media needs another gory video to remind you that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are our enemies and pay no attention to all those Judicial Watch documents that show our government's been supporting and training them. No, just watch the video and believe as we tell you to believe. Now, a lot of people are very concerned about this rush to war with Russia, especially people living in Europe, because they've already been through it. A new world war between Europe and Russia will be fought pretty much on European soil. Now, here in the United States, except for a couple of preserved Confederate war battlefields, we don't have anything that reminds us about the horrors of war. Europe is different. You go all over Europe. In France, you can still see the scars from the trench warfare of World War I. You go through Europe, there's still ruined buildings there that have never been rebuilt from World War II. When I was working in Munich, there was a whole block of the city still walled off because there was an unexploded 2,000-pound bomb or something in there, and they just figured it wasn't worth trying to dig on out. You'll see it all. For them, the war is still, there are immediate reminders about what it's like. We don't have that in the U.S. For us, war is an abstracted concept, or it's a video game. And the people of Europe do not want a new world war fought on their territory. I'm sure they'd rather it be fought here on the North American continent. But there's an article over at fortress.com, Germany's brainless compliance with U.S. military buildup in Eastern Europe, basically saying that Germany is acting as a vassal of the United States. And yes, that is very much true. Another article coming out of Russia Insider. U.S. demands obedience from its German clients. Everybody understands who's pushing for this war. It's the United States. Right now, the U.S. dollar is in serious, serious trouble. It now has competition as a global trade and banking currency, and the competition is seen as much more reliable and trustworthy. The Russian ruble, the Chinese gold-backed yuan, the U.S. dollar isn't backed by anything except the future slave labor of the American people. And it's been drastically overprinted with all this quantitative easing. And even though they're using the ultra-rich as a cash sink to try and minimize the inflationary pressures, people around the world are saying that dollar is not trustworthy. It could go at any time. And so the United States government and Wall Street want to go back to the world of the 1950s, where nobody had a choice but to use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking because of the Bretton Woods Agreement. That's what they want. That's what they're willing to risk incinerating the surface of the planet Earth for. To force the world back to dependence on the U.S. dollar. To drop the ruble, drop the yuan, drop any other currency that is a threat to the private central bankers. Get rid of Bitcoin. These money junkies who own the private central banks have a long history of sending millions of people to horrible deaths to maintain their wealth and control over humanity. That's the historical reality. If you have not hunted it down and read it, there's an article called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. It's been made into a couple of videos by various fans. But you should read the original article. There's a lot more information in there. And it's a retelling of U.S. history and world history from the point of view of the banking influence. And I've had a lot of people email me after reading this article and saying, now it all makes sense, what's been going on. Now I understand what's happening behind the scenes here. And by the way, before Germany starts rattling their sabers anymore against Russia, I'd like to send a message to Angela Merkel or anybody that she has monitoring our show, and that would be to remember what happened the last time Germany invaded Russia, because it didn't work out so well. And yes, a war between Europe and Russia is going to be fought on Europe's soil. And I don't think you want that. And if you don't want it, now's the time to stand up and say, this is a bad direction to be going here. Now, for some reason, Great Britain is beginning troop deployments to South Sudan and Somalia. And apparently they're justifying it by saying Prime Minister David Cameron pledged that we would be sending British soldiers to several African countries, the ones probably with the most resources. So now Africa is in play. Can we call it a world war yet? Actually, I already am. I am convinced that 50 years from now, history books will record that we were already into World War III at this point in history. We're just waiting for the big spectacular explosion that takes it into a truly hot total war situation. I am also convinced that 50 years from now, they will be looking on the stars and stripes with the same revulsion that our generation looked on the swastika. I don't want future Americans to have to live with that shame and that implied guilt, the way the people of Germany today, who weren't even alive in World War II, are still taught from childhood, you will be ashamed for what people who did things before you were born did. Which, by the way, is a ridiculous concept. You are not responsible for anything that happens outside your control, certainly before you were born. This idea of implied and inherited guilt is just another scam to extract money and obedience from the masses. Now, Israel's Justice Minister, Aiea Shaked, has announced she is going to push for a plan to extend Israel's civil law to all the West Bank settlements. This is basically amounting to an annexation of territories beyond the Green Line, and it is illegal under international law. When you are an occupying force in somebody else's country, you are required by various treaties to enforce that country's laws in the streets, not bring your own in. But then Israel is not exactly in the habit of complying with international law. They basically thumb their nose at that. Now, Ron Paul has penned an essay in response to the House Armed Services Committee, which last week approved an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act requiring women to register with the Selective Service. In other words, they're not just happy taking your sons and putting them in aluminum boxes and wheelchairs. Now they're coming for your daughters. When they reactivate the draft, they're going to be coming for all your kids. And Ron Paul is out there saying drafting women means equality in slavery. And he's hitting a very good point, because something you all need to remember: forced conscription for military service violates the 13th Amendment. The draft is unconstitutional. And it always has been. They try and weasel word their way around it by saying, well, you're volunteering for military service because if you don't volunteer, we're going to come and throw you in prison. That's not really volunteering. They're trying to evade the issue that the draft is a clear violation of the 13th Amendment, the ban on involuntary servitude. You really need to read that Constitution and the Bill of Rights and see how far the federal government has gone off that reservation, because they have. And they feel it's their manifest destiny. Constitution, we're here to rule the world and you will support us, or bad things will happen to you. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break. A lot of stuff going on in the economy. Not exactly a stellar day on the stock market here. And let me take a quick look at the closing numbers here. The Dow closed at 140, looks like, thereabouts. HSBC's profits fell 14%. That's a big, big hit. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about the earnings numbers are not good. We're seeing major downturns in financial institutions. We're seeing major downturns in the tech sector. The news is not good. The time is running out to keep this little Ponzi scheme together here. HSBC profits down 14%. And there's an interesting little article that came out over here saying that central banks have really messed up the entire social system. And they have, because it is a Ponzi scheme. And I'll get into that in just a little bit here. There's an article over at Investment Watch blog. Smart money has never been more bearish on silver. Physical silver is actually outperforming gold right now. And that may be because of more industrial applications for silver, or maybe because it's simply more affordable to people. But it's doing very well. Gold and silver are both up. All the rigging is starting to lose its effect, especially following Deutsche Bank's admission to rigging gold and silver prices and starting to name their accomplices. People who are trying to suppress gold and silver prices, they're kind of pulling back and saying, oh, I could actually be looking at jail time here for this kind of thing. Nobody's gone to jail yet, but at the very least you could lose your licenses to deal in gold and silver if you're caught rigging the price here. Now, there's another article also from Investment Watch blog where the U.S. is apparently couched in diplomatic language, but basically threatening other countries not to devalue their currency anymore. Now, to you and I and ordinary people on the street, you might think it's a good thing if your currency is going up, especially if you're traveling to other countries or you're buying things from other countries, if you're importing. But in reality, if your economy is based on exports, it's not a good thing at all. And when you have a country like the United States that doesn't do a lot of manufacturing and is trying to rebuild their manufacturing, and other countries devalue their currency, well, then the big box stores are going to go to those countries and import products from them. And so in a lot of ways you will see there's actually the valuation of the currency is a race to the bottom from which you can then rebuild upward. But we have all this arm twisting going on all around the world by the United States. You will do what we tell you to do. And I think the rest of the world is kind of getting fed up with that. Now, here's an interesting story. This came out of Zero Hedge. Another conspiracy theory confirmed. The European Central Bank has found widespread insider trading throughout their all of Europe, basically. And it's not just an occasional thing. It's business as usual. It's supposed to be illegal, but they're all doing it because they're special. They're bankers. They're financiers. They're allowed to break the rules. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for our top of the hour station ID. We're going to come on back to this insider trading thing after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about this article, another conspiracy theory confirmed. The European Central Bank has found widespread insider trading all over Europe's financial system. And I love the headline, another conspiracy theory confirmed, because when the independent media comes on out and says there seems to be indications of rigging, what's the first thing the establishment media does? Oh, it's a conspiracy theory, those tinfoil hat-wearing wingnut kooks. Nobody listens to them. And then sooner or later it comes out that, yeah, we were right. By golly, they were rigging gold and silver prices. By golly, they are making themselves rich by breaking laws with impunity, like insider trading. And we have all these grumbling voices over in the corporate media saying it would be so easy to discredit those conspiracy theorists if they weren't right all the time. Quick, have somebody call Rivero's show and scream that the Apollo moon landings were faked or something. We're getting desperate here. And this inside finagling may explain a lot of what we've seen, because there's another story coming out of Bloomberg. During the financial crisis, the 1%ers were the first to get out. Somehow they knew the time had come to bail on their positions. And remember what we have said many times before, when you're dealing with an overvalued market, only the first ones who get out get all their money back. Everybody else is left holding a very impressive-looking brokerage report. And that's all it is. It's an impressive number on a piece of paper. So there's a lot of finagling going on. Somebody wrote in and asked if I thought the movie The Big Short was an accurate telling of the mortgage-backed security fraud. And it's a fun movie, by the way. It's a good movie. You should see it. It's only part of a more complex story. And I also recommend the documentary Inside Job, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary and then promptly vanished from the American cultural desert, as it were. Another article, this is coming out of Science Direct. Can banks individually create money out of nothing? The theories and the empirical evidence. This is actually a scholarly article with an abstract of how these researchers went on out and borrowed money from a bank. They had access to the bank's ledgers and did confirm empirically the money that was in the loan they took out simply appeared out of nowhere. They called it fairy dust. So you realize what a scam these bankers are running. You go in for a loan to buy a home, a car, or a business. They just type in a number into the computer, and you walk on out and you buy the car and the home or the business. You're not allowed to type numbers into a computer to pay them back. You have to work for somebody who has some of that ink and paper stuff to pay that number back to the bank in actual currency plus accruing interest. That's the system of enslavement. And that is what you get when private banks are allowed to operate the public currency as a privatized for-profit operation, as opposed to the system the United States originally started with, where the public currency was managed as a public utility. Now, as a footnote to this, back in 1968, there was an important court case, which you have probably never heard of for reasons that are going to be obvious. It was First National Bank of Montgomery versus Jerome Daly. The nickname for it is the Credit River case. Now, Mr. Daly had fallen on hard times, as so many of us have, and the bank moved to foreclose on his home. And he went into court arguing about the principle of due consideration. Now, consideration is a legal term meaning something of value. And Mr. Daly argued that because the bank just created the number in his account out of thin air, there was no real consideration. The bank had not provided anything of any real value whatsoever before obligating Mr. Daly to work for whoever has stacks of that ink and paper stuff in order to send that ink and paper stuff back to the bank. The bank's president, Mr. Morgan, admitted on the stand that, yes, banks simply create money out of thin air. And the bank's president excused this behavior by saying, well, that all banks operate this way. Even though, and this is the important part, there is no law that allows a bank to create money out of thin air outside of the Federal Reserve itself. Now, Judge Martin Mahoney took the view that the consideration by the bank was completely fictitious. Fraud negates consent. He declared this whole thing both unlawful and unconstitutional. The jury agreed, and Mr. Daly kept his home. Now, the 1968 Minnesota trial court's decision holding the Federal Reserve Act unconstitutional and void, and holding the National Banking Act unconstitutional and void, has never been appealed or vacated. It was simply declared bad law and buried. Mr. Daly's lawyer was disbarred on trumped-up charges, and Judge Martin Mahoney was poisoned to death 6 months later. These money junkies play for keeps. Freddie Mac is reporting a $354 million net loss in the first quarter of this year. They're already talking about another taxpayer bailout. And, of course, you know what a taxpayer bailout means, right? The government is going to take $1 trillion from you and give it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to you at interest. That's what a bailout is. And it's a pyramid scheme. Now, when you dig past all the jargon and the very colorful language and all the deliberate obfuscation about what's going on back there, you can distill down private central banking very simply. And I did it in an article called The 11th Marble. And it simply says, any 5-year-old child knows that if you put 10 marbles into a tin can, you can only take 10 marbles out. Private central bankers believe that you can put 10 marbles or dollars into a tin can or the economy and somehow magically get 11 marbles back out, from which we can conclude that private central bankers are dumber than 5-year-old children. They're certainly just as greedy and selfish, though. But that's really what it's all about. The way private central banks are designed, by design, they create more debt than money with which to pay that debt, and there is the enslavement mechanism. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how much you sacrifice. That debt can never be paid off. Because whatever money that you're working for to give them itself enters circulation as a loan at interest. That's it. That's the fraud right there. Right now, the government could come on out, take your homes, your cars, your business, all the food in your refrigerator, leave you standing in the middle of the road completely stark naked with nothing, and they still could not pay off the national debt. That's the trap. That's why so many nations are in trouble. What the global bankers have been trying to do is spread the debt around so it doesn't look like it's too bad. Oh, everybody's equally in debt. It's not a problem. Yeah, it's a problem. Puerto Rico did officially default on their $422 million bond payment. Everybody who bought a credit default swap on that possible default, and a lot of people were. It was a good bet Puerto Rico was going to default. We don't know what the exposure is out there. So what's the U.S. government going to do about this? Same thing they always do. We've got to take more money from the American people. We've got to bail out Puerto Rico, which means actually giving the money to the bankers. I mean, the headline coming out of Investment Watch blog, Puerto Rico needs bailout or we are all doomed. It's that derivatives nightmare that's out there. that could crash the entire system. And the government let it happen. Because derivatives, credit default swaps, don't play by the same rules as a regular insurance policy. You can buy the credit default swap on other people's assets. Can't do that with regular insurance. And regular insurance companies are required to maintain cash assets on hand to cover an expected, reasonably number of expected claims. Derivatives companies don't have to do that. They can just sell the credit default swaps, write themselves bonuses out of the money coming on in and have a high old time. And then when the market turns down and the credit default swaps come due, they collapse. That's what happened to AIG back in 2008. They had been getting rich off credit default swaps, and then they'd spent the money, didn't have any cash reserves, and they collapsed. Now remember, last November, I think it was, the U.S. Congress passed a law that changed the definition of a banking customer. Now, if you're as old as I am, and if you are, you have my deepest sympathies. You remember a time where if you were a depositor in a bank, you went in, you put your money in a savings account, they would collect it together, loan it on out at interest, and split that interest with you so that your money would grow in the savings account. Well, those happy days have kind of gone away because now the savings accounts are turning negative. You have to pay the bank to hold your money in a savings account. Most people aren't going along with that, which is now why they're talking about a cashless society. But back then, if the bank went bust, the depositors were first in line to recover their money. That's all changed. Bank customers, depositors, have been reclassified as unsecured investors in the bank. The law now says if the bank goes bust, you as an unsecured investor are expected to share in the losses. And they changed the ordering of who gets paid when a bank is liquidated. And the credit default swaps got moved up to the very top, and you, the ordinary savings account holder, got moved down to the very bottom. Because to the United States government, banks are far more important than human beings. We have way too many human beings. We don't need to take care of them. But we must always worship and preserve and protect those private central banks. So let's talk about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and its mutated offspring, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Article that came on out says it takes a lot of digging and digging to find the true intent of the United States and the European Union behind the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Now that changed because Greenpeace acquired a majority of the document and leaked it out. And it's basically an agreement to allow corporations to take center stage in the establishment of domestic policy. The civil government will be kept around for ritual purposes, traditional purposes, but corporations will directly set domestic policy. Vaccines are safe because the corporation says they are. Nobody's around to challenge that. GMOs are healthy for you. Nobody's around to challenge that. The government was just getting in the way of making a fast buck. And again, we're seeing that arm twist mentality coming out of the U.S. government. The YouTube video, Obama on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Other countries should play by rules set by the U.S., not the other way around. And he said exactly the same thing over in the Pacific. He's saying, you know, our rules, not China's, should decide how the economy is going to work. They're trying very hard to reestablish a global economy under the control of the United States of America as it was under Bretton Woods. And everybody who signed on to Bretton Woods found out what a raw deal it was when Nixon ended gold convertibility, and they're not going to sign on to this again. And the U.S. government is literally trying to go on out and threaten with war any country that refuses to sign on to a global economic order centered on the United States of America. Now, because of these 800 leaked pages, people are really waking up, and we are getting word. France is not going to sign the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership deal due to the U.S. position. France is saying the TTIP is a threat to French agriculture because of the mandate that they will buy GMO food from the United States, and they don't want GMO food. And Francois Hollande has the full support of his government. They're not going to sign. And if they don't sign, the deal is off. They can't just sign with some of the European Union. Another article coming on out from hangthebankers.com confirming that TTIP represents the United States blackmailing the European Union to accept GMO food. So, Aeropostale, the clothing store, is now filing for bankruptcy this week. They're closing 100 stores. It's getting ugly out there. And this, I think, is a red warning sign, especially for all you preppers. There was a story that came out of naturalnews.com. Apparently, on the mainland, there are now home invasions being carried out by people who are looking for food. People who are hungry are now raiding homes, breaking into the homes, threatening the homeowners with knives. They don't take the TV set and the DVD and the cable box. They raid the refrigerator and the pantry. That's how bad things are in this country, and that's an indicator, because that will be a trend that will continue to grow. Now, apparently over at Barclays Bank, their Barclays.net payment system outage caused a major problem over the weekend. Apparently it went down on Friday, and nobody could process payments. Customers, they were saying they were unable to pay the staff. They couldn't pay for their supplies. Customer service provided no help. Was it a computer hack, or did Barclays have a cash crisis? Because we've seen that happen before, where a bank will all of a sudden have a liquidity jam-up. And they'll say, oh, the computer system's down. Or we have to limit the maximum withdrawal at ATM machines to only $100 because they blame computer hackers for it. We're going to be seeing these liquidity crises happening more and more. Story coming out of Zero Hedge, Obamacare to unveil price shock 1 week before the elections. Sounds like questionable timing to me, but they're talking about double-digit increases on your Obamacare policies. Remember all the stuff Obama told you? The Affordable Care Act was going to make health care more affordable to Americans. It didn't. When it first started being talked about, I said, go back and look at what happened when auto insurance was made mandatory. The premiums went through the roof, the quality of service and the benefits went into the basement, and it will happen again. Anytime there's a government-created monopoly, it exists to plunder the people. And in the case of Obamacare, it's failed. Both its overt purpose of affordable health care and its covert purpose of plundering the people. Americans can't afford those new sky-high insurance policies. The deductibles on these policies are so high, most people buying these policies will never use them in a year. They're being forced to pay for expensive health insurance and their own health care out of pocket. And most are simply preferring to pay the IRS penalty instead. So the health insurance companies that wrote this law didn't get the windfall profits. The U.S. government didn't get their mafia-like piece of the action in increased tax revenues, and that is why Obama is already out there talking about a carbon tax. Because the U.S. government is desperate for more of your money. And where that plan falls apart is we're tapped out. If we have to pay more for a carbon tax, there's going to be something else we go without. The net increase in spending will be nil. The net gain in tax revenues, zero. Until they bring back high-paying jobs. And they're not going to do that. Because the money junkies think all the money should belong to them. They sit up in their palaces of gold and say, all your wealth are belong to us. Economies can't work that way. An economy has to have money flowing at all levels of the economy into all necessary sectors of investment. When it's all piled up in one big stinking pile over the rich neighborhoods, the economy freezes, and that's what's going on right now. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you're aware, Barack Obama went over to Great Britain, and he wagged his finger at those British subjects and said, "You will stay in the European Union. We've worked too hard to have gotten this far on the New World Order. We've got you welded into the EU. You have to stay there, or you're just going to spoil all of our plans." And not surprisingly, following Obama's attempt to insert himself into British politics, the Brexit is now gaining in the polls. So they're going to follow up. Apparently, Warren Buffett is out there screaming that Great Britain has to stay in the European Union. And they're even going to send Bill Clinton over there. So, hey, it's a really good thing when you're a slave to the private central bank. I think you ought to stay in the European Union. I think it's a really good idea. I did not have sex with that bank. Anyway, so it's very obvious what's going on. As one of our callers was saying earlier, the time has run out on these various agendas, whether it's the capturing and controlling of all the resource-rich parts of the world and shackling them to the dollar, dragging the world back to Bretton Woods, globalism. It's all gone on too long, and the people are waking up to what's happening here. There's another article. This is from Sputnik News. And basically, they have an article that documents how the U.S. has been behind the formation of the European Union as part of a long-term agenda of a global government. And apparently it goes all the way back to the end of World War II. And it involved Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and the Nixon administrations. And this idea of a single European nation was seen as an anchor for American regional interests. In other words, the United States was tired of dealing with all these independent nations. They just wanted one big bloc that they could do business with. So this has been ongoing. And there's another reason for the Brexit. Nobody elected the Central Intelligence Agency to muck about with the world. Nobody has elected the United States government to rule the entire planet. People need to stand firm because it's reached absurd levels, especially with this forced migration, immigration, refugee situation, trying to blur us all together so we forget who we are. We lose our sense of an identity, whether it's cultural, regional, historical, even gender. Our gender identity is under attack to make us pliant, obedient workers. Over in Great Britain, Birmingham City councillors have pledged to provide housing for 500 Syrian refugees, ignoring that there are 30,000 Birmingham people already in trouble in Birmingham, including 500 homeless families. You legal people here that are homeless, well, it's all your fault here, but we're going to spend tax dollars to house these refugees from Syria because that's a stepping stone to the New World Order. And you local homeless people, you don't count. You don't fit the agenda. So just go on away and stop bothering us here. My goodness. Another little article out here basically pointing out that what this is all about, the battle of globalism versus nationalism. And nationalism is under attack. In fact, I got an email from somebody pointing out that all of a sudden, all over the net, places like Google and various online dictionaries, they've changed the definition of fascism to mean to say it's nationalism. And that's absurd. What they're trying to do is make nationalism sound like it's a bad thing. Oh, nationalism, it's dictatorship and it's evil. And they're trying to destroy that, because they're still pushing globalism, and it's triggered a backlash of nationalistic fever. And so they're out there trying to say that anybody who's being a nationalist is somehow evil. Look at how they attacked Donald Trump for his campaign slogan, America First, or Make America Great Again. You're not supposed to be thinking about your country, Donald Trump. What's wrong with you? Get with the program. This globalist agenda is in serious, serious trouble. The big question is, how bloody are they willing to go before they admit they have failed this? We're going to take a break for station identification and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, I just got an email from somebody who doesn't really understand what a credit default swap is and why it's different from insurance. And so let me just go over this again real quickly. You can buy fire insurance on your home, which is an asset you own, at least in part. You are not allowed to buy fire insurance on your neighbor's home, because obviously you could make a lot of money by sneaking over there in the middle of the night with a can of gasoline and a road flare. And your fire insurance company has to keep enough cash reserves on hand to pay a reasonably expected number of claims coming on in. That's regular insurance, whether it's fire insurance, theft, car, health, so forth. A credit default swap is like buying an insurance policy on an investment, and it was intended originally to reduce your risk. So let's say that I invest $20 million in a startup high-tech company, and then I buy a credit default swap for several thousand, that if my investment goes bad, will return much of that money to me. So far, so good, except the guy in the next office over can also buy a credit default swap on the $20 million I invested in the high-tech company. And the company that is selling those credit default swaps does not need to be keeping cash reserves on hand. That's the difference. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yes, I want to go back to this Brexit situation. This interference from America is getting up people's noses. But on top of that,
I don't blame them one bit.
And on top of that, we've got the TTIP, which is indicating that we'll lose one of our favorite government-sponsored systems, the National Health Service. It may not be, perfect, but at least it is free at the point of need. And people do pay into it through their national insurance scheme, but it is a great asset to Britain. And then we're threatened with immigration. If we go with this stay in the Europe, we're going to be forced to accept hundreds of Islamic refugees from various parts of the world.
Well, we're seeing that. We're seeing that not just in Great Britain. We're seeing it here in the United States of America. These refugees and illegal immigrants coming on in are carrying contagious diseases. They're already putting a strain on our already overstressed medical systems.
Yeah, but I mean, in Britain, you see, the taxpayer would have to pick up the bill because they get National Health Service free health care. But on top of that, we've got this foreign policy now. This European army. And remember, we have U.S. troops in Britain, mainly Air Force, of course, and they keep bombing these places in Libya and Syria and what have you, using Britain as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. But in any European war in which Russia is engaged, Russia will plaster Britain with nukes. So we want the troops out. We don't want to be part of this nonsense, this European army, and we want to be separate and go back to where we had the Commonwealth of Friends,
Well, generally from the emails I'm getting from people who live in Great Britain, the push for an exit is overwhelming, and I don't think you have to worry about popular support for the Brexit. Your big worry is that the Brexit referendum is going to be just as crooked as the Scottish independence referendum was, where they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were stealing that election.
Well, absolutely. I mean, even the last general election, which the Conservatives supposedly won, we know that was fiddled by using postal votes. They were expecting in some constituencies 4 ballot boxes of postal votes, and 18 boxes turned up. completely reversing the actual vote count. So we know that this sort of thing goes on, and people are getting really fed up with it.
Well, you know, I remember some years ago when I was working in Europe, I did visit the Tower of London, and to the best of my recollection, that large blood-stained wooden block and axe is still there.
You could be right, Michael.
I think
but,
so.
I mean, we're looking at a position now where, you know, we're being driven by fraud and deception into this nonsense called the EU.
Well, I keep thinking back to that saying by John F. Kennedy, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And it almost seems like this rush to create a global government has created an environment that could lead to literally a global revolution against all the oligarchical governments, all the corrupt politicians, and all the bankers all at once. It would make the French Revolution look like a minor speed bump. Anyway, listen, John, we're going to have to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're coming up at the top of the hour, and our guest, John Brakey, he just confirmed by email, so he is going to be joining us here about the Arizona vote fraud. Getting back to the Brexit, nearly two-thirds of farmers are backing the Brexit, according to the latest poll. And the reason the farmers are in favor of Brexit is they are sick and tired of the European Union officials up in Brussels, most of whom aren't even farmers themselves, coming on down with just this microscopic regulation on how they're supposed to do everything. And you need to understand, when you get a growing government that is taking your money, they justify taking that money by coming on in and tinkering with your life. And say, this is what you're getting, this is what you voted for, this is what you pay us for, to come on in and make sure that you've got the correct number of steps on the staircase and that you're using the correct pesticides that are sold by our campaign contributors. The bigger the government gets, the more they take from you, the more they want to tinker with your life to sort of explain away why things are the way that they are. Now, as you know, there's this manufactured anti-Semitism crisis going on in the British government. And we know it's manufactured because all the people out there screaming about it turned out to be linked to the Israeli lobby. Not too long ago, there was a lady in the Labour Party, Naz Shah, who posted an image showing Israel in the middle of the United States of America, saying this is a good solution. You know, if the U.S. loves Israel so much, just move it over to the middle of the United States of America and all will be well. She was denounced as an anti-Semite and suspended from the Labour Party. Here is the payoff. That image of Israel in the middle of the United States of America comes from Professor Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish gentleman. And he was out there saying that, yeah, maybe the way to peace in the Middle East is for Israel to maybe think about being someplace else. But anytime anybody posts anything about Israel, the first reaction is, you're an anti-Semite. You have to leave. You have to lose your career. You have to lose your job. Nobody's allowed to criticize Israel. Nobody is above criticism. Nobody. I mean, look at the hard time they're giving the Pope over the priestly child molestation issue. Nobody is above reproach. Nobody is above criticism. The First Amendment guarantees us the right to freedom of speech, and that First Amendment is not there for exotic dancers. It's not there for art canvases with bovine feces glued to them. It is there to guarantee that we may criticize the actions of government, any government, without fear of reprisal. That's why that is there. It is very obvious from their actions that Israel does not believe in freedom of speech or freedom of thought or freedom of association. They are not allies with the United States of America in that philosophical sense. They are an enemy of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They demonstrate it every time they try and shut somebody down. Now, up in Austria, they had a recent anti-Semitic attack where an Austrian man had swastikas carved into his body, into his chest and his forehead. When he was out there saying, see, there's anti-Semitism all over Europe. He's just been arrested. They found out he did it to himself. Oh, feel sorry for me, feel sorry for me. And you want to know something? There's a really good reason to think that anything involving a swastika these days is another false flag by Israel supporters. And you know why? Nobody cares about the swastika anymore except Israel. Israel is still trapped in the 1940s, and they want you trapped there with them. This is the 21st century. Nobody cares about the swastika. Anybody waving it around is a paid agent provocateur for somebody. And the reasoning is very simple. When you were a child and you played cowboys and Indians, you wanted to be the cowboy. You'd make the little kids be the Indians. If you played cops and robbers, you wanted to be the cop. You made the little kids be the robbers. The same thing applies here to the Nazis. They lost the war. And Americans don't identify with the losers. It's that simple. Nobody has swastikas around anymore except the people who are out there trying to keep us trapped to this whole Hitler Holocaust mirage so that Israel can get money and obedience and deflect criticism of their actions. And that really is the issue. Actions and behavior. Nobody is on Israel's case because of their ethnicity or their religion. It is their behavior of their government that is at issue and deserving of criticism. And trying to deflect criticism of the behavior of Israel's government makes about as much sense as deflecting criticism of the Nazis by screaming, "You're just being an anti-German." The Nazis didn't do anything wrong. You're just being anti-Aryan. That's your problem out there. Now, speaking of more hoaxes and frauds, apparently they're down in Florida at the Aventura Turnberry Jewish Center. The FBI has arrested a bomber who was going to bomb the Jewish Center. That dastardly person. How dare he think about bombing a Jewish center down there in Florida? Gee, I wonder where he got the bomb. Oh, the FBI gave it to him. I mean, the FBI apparently finds it too difficult to actually go out and find real criminals, like the ransomware authors, the cyber criminals. In fact, the FBI's official recommendation, if you get ransomware on your computer, is just go ahead and pay the ransom. They can't do a thing about it. But by golly, the FBI is great at arresting people they've provided with bombs and what on else and talked into these things. It's a setup. It's propaganda. We all have to feel sorry for Israel so that Israel can go on stealing Palestine and everything else here. And it's not exclusively Israel. Let's be fair here a little bit. Over at New York College, there were 3 students, all 20 years old, who claimed they were a victim of a racially motivated attack. Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. See, racism is on display here. We were attacked. Grand jury just indicted them. They made it up. They fabricated the whole thing. Anybody who wants to make a political point or anybody who just wants to have their 15 minutes of fame, they fake a racially motivated attack or a swastika or anything, and the media just says, oh, yes, we've got something to put on the air here, because we don't want to talk about how Iraq's parliament almost fell over the weekend. It's all an illusion. I think the reason for the success of the Matrix franchise of motion pictures is easy to understand. People get it. That at some level, it's a metaphor for the world we live in. We look into these little flat computer screens and we think that is a view into the real world, and no, it isn't. It's a manufactured illusion to keep us all slaves without realizing that's exactly what's going on. Speaking of attacks on identity, this was a very bizarre story, came out of Daily Caller. And apparently there is this white privilege conference going on. And this speaker there, author Paul Kivel, and they made this weird comment about even though he shares his name with a great Christian saint, he came on out and said almost everything bad is the fault of Christianity. Now, I've never heard of St. Kivel. But, I mean, look what's going on. A white privilege conference? It's the Christians who are bad? Everything that people identify with is under attack right now. Can you see the pattern? Your identity is being destroyed bit by bit by bit. Whether you're a Christian, whether your heritage is in the deep south, And now they're attacking your gender. After 7 years of Obama, we don't even know what bathroom we're supposed to use. Now, there was an interesting little article over at informationliberation.com. This Swedish girl made a video and went on out into the street and said, how would you react if I said I'm a man? Cute little Swedish girl. I'm a man. And they ever say, all right, good for you. And then she says, how would you react if I said I was Japanese? And, of course, everybody says, that's ridiculous. You're obviously not Japanese. You're a Swedish girl. And that illustrates how silly this whole gender thing has become. Now, if you want to solve the problem, just change the signs on the restroom doors. Penis and vagina. Problem is solved. But even our gender identity is under attack. By the way, I think I should tell you all, inside, I identify with being a millionaire. And if you don't send me lots of money right now, you are just being intolerant. Okay, over in Berlin, they've been trying to build this brand new airport, the Brandenburg Airport. And it's huge cost overruns, very delayed. People are starting to say this thing's never actually going to open. Not too long ago, there was a whistleblower who came forward who exposed that there was a huge corruption scandal going on with payoffs and bribes and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, the whistleblower had poison put into his coffee, was sick for 3 months. These money junkies, they do like to play for real. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Americans aren't buying the climate change nonsense. The Obama administration is claiming there are now going to be climate refugees. We have to let people into this country from areas that were damaged by our carbon dioxide. Actually, carbon dioxide makes plants grow faster, bigger, taller, more food. But, it's a climate refugee. You have to let this climate refugee into your home. I mean, it's absurd. Our government has become a parody of itself. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and when we come on back, a little more chit-chat, and then we're going to be talking to John Brakey from Arizona. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here from Mo in Florida. Aloha, Mo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Welcome to your new, like the other caller said, your new digs, whatever, but I don't have a question. I don't have something for you to solve, and I just want to say my little piece, and I'll hang up, because I do love you, bro, you and Claire.
Okay.
And I was out there on the patio having a glass of wine. I'm down here in southern Florida, beautiful weather, and I was just thinking, you know what? Michael's on the front line speaking truth to power, and you know what? Whatever it's worth, that's exactly what you're doing. And, you know, like I said, you don't have to thank me for the kind words, because it's more than words. It's like, you know, if you're in a wedding party and your kids and you're in a little file and you go into a wedding and a drone flies over by the United States and blows up your family and your kids, you're speaking for those people. And the people in Gaza, you're speaking for those people. You're speaking for those people that have had their family members destroyed, blown up, killed. You are their voice. And you know, I don't want to get all sloppy, but this is what it's really about. And the rest of it's all just a bunch of fluff. So I just want to say, man, I love you and Claire. You're good people. And you're a real patriot. I love you, brother.
Well, thank you for those kind words here, and thank you for the phone call. And, yeah, it can be a little daunting and overwhelming, and one of the reasons why I try and keep things kind of up and light and funny is to make it all a little bit more palatable. I am opposed to war on general principles. I'm opposed to war that impoverishes the masses for the benefit of the bankers. I'm opposed to this war because I'm convinced we're going to lose it. And I really don't want some member of the next generation coming up to me and saying, why didn't you try and stop it? Getting on to science and health. Oh, actually, we got one. Oh, boy, the calls are coming on in here. All right, let's try and grab Guy in Los Angeles before the top of the hour. Guy, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael, and nice to talk to you on your new station.
Thank you.
This election, I believe, is between nationalism and globalism. Would you agree?
Absolutely. and not just our election, but the Brexit. Yeah, everybody's pushing back against this New World Order mindset.
You know, I feel sorry for Cruz because originally he came out as a Tea Party supporter and he just sold out the party. So and his affiliations with the Bush and not being eligible to run, I mean, it's just one thing after the next.
Well, I don't feel sorry for them. I mean, these were all choices that he made in his life. And the Tea Party was a really good idea, but it got hijacked. The fact that they took on Ted Cruz and also Sarah Palin as figureheads showed that they had a good idea, but they weren't thinking very clearly about how best to implement it.
Well, it just comes down to, like I said, nationalism versus globalism, and a vote for no to NAFTA and the WTO.
I'm absolutely in agreement. You know, America needs a leader who's going to put America first, second, and third, and right now the only one out there talking like that is Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is just trying to fulfill the agreement that was made to build the wall when Reagan gave amnesty to all the illegals in 1985 or whatever it was.
Guy, I'm going to have to let you go here. We've got to take a top-of-the-hour break. Thank you for the phone call. We should be back with John Brakey after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and joining us on the air right now is John Brakey from Arizona. John, thank you for spending time with us today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It really is to be on your show.
Well, give us the lowdown. What's going on with this lawsuit? For some strange reason, there doesn't seem to be much coverage of this on the corporate media. So give us all the backstory about what happened in Arizona, how the lawsuit came about, and what its current status is.
Well, okay, let's start from the beginning. Is that it was on the presidential preference election, which was really a real disaster in Arizona. And it looked like, to be honest with you, it looked like a strip and a flip, and with voter suppression added on top of it. And after the Secretary of State, who I met with, and asked her not to certify this election and to work together to investigate these allegations of the strip and the flip. And I mean, you know, the voter suppression was obvious. 150,000 people were suppressed in Maricopa County. The last election we had, like this one, a presidential preference, really was in 2008. And we could see by the numbers that if you look at all the 15 counties in Arizona, they're all up, and Maricopa's down 4.10%, and the rest of the counties are up 9% average, and in Maricopa being the largest county, they went from 400 voting locations in 2008 to 60. Incredible. And that right there, people would just drive up and go, I'm not getting in that line. And we could see the damage. And then we saw, that the poll workers, some of them were reporting, one was a lawyer, a remarkable lady, that they went ahead and were passing out ballots to people in the precincts because they ran out of ballots for this race. And just to explain the race in Arizona, it was a race for delegates, okay? And we have 9 congressional districts, and that was the race, and so that was point 1 of our suit, was that voter suppression, which had Richard Charman come in and testify and look at the numbers. Everybody could look at it and see that that was the case. Point 2 was the stripping of people of their voting rights. And, just a little bit of background there. In 2002, the Help America Vote Act passed. Half that $4 billion went into statewide databases. By 2006, we're reading the book going, hey, does the GOP know if you like anchovies? Well, we're 10 years later, and you're going to say, well, does Google and everybody else know that same thing? And so that was definitely a big issue that we fought in court. And then, of course, the third thing that was very disturbing is that the results looked like they were flipped. Now, I'm not saying that they were, but Hillary Clinton wins the vote by mail by 60%, which is a sizable amount of votes. And then Sanders wins the precinct vote by 60%, even though he was suppressed. And then the provisionals, he wins by 63. So basically, that's our case. 3 things that we presented in court. And then, in a show cause hearing, we want to show cause why we can't trust these people. Last November, I caught them rigging a bond election here, and I got it all on video, okay? The election before that, I did Santa Cruz County. Well, I found a guy who was programming 12 of the 15 counties in the state of Arizona on a 1099 form. That's an IRS 1099. And he was doing about $2 million in a cycle, and it was beyond a records request. And, it just points to how what we know, because we've been in litigation for 12 years off and on fighting the corruption of Arizona. And we know that the voting equipment was, set up to steal and manipulate because, lastly, is that you can never look at a ballot in this state. I mean, ballots are not a public record. Our elections are not verifiable. And the biggest deal they're doing is in the vote by mail.
Yeah, there's been a lot of strange things like that. So we've got voters being stripped of their right to vote. We have results seeming to be flipped. We have a very obvious discontinuity between the live vote and the postal vote or the mail vote. It does seem to me that there's a prima facie case that the election has been subject to undue influence, to put it politely. So you took it before the court. Are you running into a lot of resistance from the court system?
Totally. They made us jump through hoops. So first off, this was a special action that we filed. And so we had to sue everybody. Oh, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Cost a lot of money. And then they turn around and say, oh, gee, the law says that the president, there's no oversight of the presidential preference, and a citizen cannot make a challenge because it's a special election. And they threw that out. And they hit it really hard trying to do that we got video coming out that's going to be quite disturbing about what was said in court about the citizen's right, because we know that in Arizona, we got a strong constitution. We really do. It talks about the purity of elections run by the people, and that, legislatively you cannot make any laws to take away those rights. And, well, they did. And in court, they would not allow us to present evidence because, like I said, it was a show cause hearing. And we want to say, cause, Your Honor, we can't trust these people. Let me show you the body of work that Audit AZ, our team, has put together over the years, including the recent elections. And they would not allow us to present anything like that. They said, no, this is about this election. And we know that if you can't challenge an election with proof of suppression, with proof of stripping people of their rights, and proof of looks like there's a flip, how the hell are you ever going to go ahead and challenge anything else? Because you can't. Because electronic voting and the election fraud that goes on there is an invisible theft done inside the machine.
Yeah, and it's a big problem that there's no audit in there. Now, my philosophy is simply this. If a government cannot prove beyond all doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over us, then we are not obligated to obey that government, to pay its bills, and to sacrifice the lives of our children in their wars. The burden of proof should be on the government, but the system is very much biased against anybody challenging the system. The big secret is how badly our elections are rigged, and nobody wants that to come out. This year it's coming out anyway. Because then confidence in the government and its legitimacy evaporates. Here in Hawaii, they've got this ridiculous law that if you're going to challenge the result of an election, you have to do it within a 2-week window. And that is, of course, ridiculously short amount of time to try and assemble your evidence. So is the case still proceeding? Have you hit a roadblock?
Well, the case ended, and I'll tell you how it ended is that, finally I was able to get to the stand. Okay, after we had the famous Douglas Jones in, we brought him in by internet, and he was testifying about the strip part of the case, meaning that people having their voter rights taken away by saying, hey, you're no longer a Democrat or a Republican. Mostly it was all Democrats, okay?
Yes.
And he wanted to talk about the Anonymous report, because Anonymous, right after the election, went ahead and he hacked the system to prove it, okay? And so Doug Jones was talking about his methodology of what he did and how he did it. And immediately the other side jumps up and says, oh, no, Your Honor, stop this, stop this. They might also have said, hey, we run a system by security by obscurity. Nobody knows. Because what they were doing was using MiFi cellular at the precincts. And then the databases were also run by a private corporation. Okay? And you know, going back to what I was saying before, is that, you know, in 2002, the Help America Vote Act passed, $2 billion, okay? And then you turn around, here you are after 2006 when that book came out about does the GOP know if you have anchovies? Now we're in a situation, does Google know what you're doing? Does Facebook know what you're doing? Do they know who your preferences are? You remember the whole scandal that broke out between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton about the back door that they found that was open in their database?
Yeah, I remember that one. I remember that one.
Yeah.
You know, plus there's been
this whole thing tied together.
You know, there's been a big stink lately about how a lot of state voter databases have been hacked into to at least copy off the information, which is obviously of value to political campaigns, and they can't guarantee that those databases aren't being remotely altered.
Totally. And that's what Doug Jones, one of the best in the country, was trying to tell them, and the court refused to hear it. Okay? They said, well, anonymous is not a person, and we're not going to allow evidence like that coming in. And Doug was just explaining the methodology of how it would work, and he's issued some other reports, what I understand, talking about how this stuff is not certified and the dangers of it, and now we're seeing it happening all across the country.
Well, it is epidemic, and it has been for quite a long time. I mean, you had the Collier brothers who wrote Vote Scam back during the first Clinton presidency. We had that wonderful movie, Hacking Democracy, which focuses on Bev Harris and blackboxvoting.org. It's been going on all along. The difference is this election has made it visible to the American people that we don't actually have democracy, that our leaders are pre-selected from this political clique that are already approved by the bankers in Israel and the military-industrial complex, and the American people are very, very angry about this. And again, as I said, I think the attitude that's evolving is if the government isn't running fair elections, then we don't have to listen to them, we don't have to pay their bills, we don't have to sacrifice our children's lives in their wars of conquest. We don't have a legal, legitimate government, we have an occupying force in Washington, D.C. on behalf of a foreign government, I might add. All right, so where are you going to go from here?
Well, we are getting ready to, we've got one set of videos, okay, and we're in the process of editing. You know, I'm a veteran of this kind of stuff. This is my 13th year coming up of doing this. This is probably my 8th or 9th litigation, and we got a pretty good track record. We are hitting over 50%. I knew going into this one that we were probably going to go ahead and lose because we knew how the standard, just like you said about Hawaii, Arizona is the same way. It's that really it's less than that. After it's certified, you have less than 5 days to file a lawsuit and present the evidence that you know it was stolen. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's monstrous because nobody really can. Okay? But if it could have been done, we had the case for those 3 other items. But of course, you're not going to touch ballots or look at ballots. Ballots are not a public record in Arizona. Are they a public record in Hawaii? Do you know?
Actually, I do not honestly know that. I mean, they ought to be. Ballots ought to be public records. But the whole system is just an absolute sham. But the good news is this year the American people are seeing it. This election is going to wind up more of a debacle than 2000 down there in Florida, where we still don't actually know who really won the election. It went to the Supreme Court. They threw it to Bush and then said, our decision can't be cited as a precedent in the future. Well,
you know, talking about, I'm glad you brought up Florida, okay, is that, you know, ballots are a public record in Florida. And that's why we know that no matter how you add it up, George Bush did not win Florida because 3 days after 9/11 on page 15 of the New York Times, it explained the whole story. But, of course, it was after 9/11. Okay, and we all kind of know what 9/11 was, and you know how that all shook out. And so basically, you know, our state The only way that you can get a recount in my state, you cannot buy one, you cannot ask for one. The only way you get a recount is if the results are within 0.1%. Okay, that's an anomaly. In Florida, it's 0.25%. But at the end, in Florida, you can go ahead and say, I'm filing a public records request and I want to have them all, and you can. And, you know, that's kind of what I'm working for in the long room, is probably get an initiative going in this state, and a massive one, and to get people to understand, and we are doing that. I mean, because of shows like yours and others, you know, we passed the Rubicon on voter fraud. That's history. I mean, people are now saying election fraud, rigged elections. Now, the mainstream media, they're too big taking in on that $5 billion that's coming in from this presidential election. They want to keep the fight going and raking in the money and throw us all to the wolves.
Well, don't forget, you know, the TV network news and two major newspapers own that voters' news service that tabulates the votes. They're never going to call into question the accuracy of the election because, you know, they're part of the problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, the only thing I want to share is that this is our country. You know, I've been an activist most of my life. I've spent 12 years pretty much full time on this subject matter. And you know, I want people to come to our site, look what we're into, what we're doing, open their eyes up. If they could donate a little to help us on cost, we'd appreciate it. You know, the name of our site is called, or the name of my group is Audit AZ, which stands for Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, and Transparency in Elections, Arizona. And my site is called electionnightmares.com. And you're going to learn a lot there, and you're going to see some hard stats. Of course, you know, we've got elections today. We're watching those right now. You know, what's going to happen in Indiana. We just put together a spreadsheet and taking a look and see what we can dig up. I don't know if you know this or not, but, you know, Bev Harris is coming out with an extremely, extremely important report today. Okay?
Oh, okay.
The vote being fractioned. Have you heard anything about this at all?
I have not heard anything about it yet, but I haven't been over to her website yet today.
Go there and take a look. You're going to be quite startled and pleased, because I do think that we're at a point of a tipping point. I'm planning to be in Philadelphia for the convention. I'm working with a lot of other activists, putting evidence together of this fraud. We got connections into the Sanders camp. Yes, this is the third rail of politics, talking election fraud. And we have to deliver a mandate to our people, whoever that is, Trump, because let's face it, they don't want Trump and they don't want Sanders. The status quo wants what they want, the same old stuff that they've always been getting: more war, more drones, more people put in jails, and, you know, we have to get our vote back, because without our vote, we haven't got anything. And just in closing, I'm a big fan of Chris Hedges, and when he says there's no excuse left, either you join the revolt or you're on the wrong side of history. You either obstruct through civil disobedience, the only way left to us, by the plundering criminal class of Wall Street. Either you taste and feel the smell and the intoxication of freedom and revolt, or you sink into a misery of despair and apathy. Either you are a rebel or you're a slave. I'm a rebel, and I thank you for being a rebel.
Well, thank you for being a rebel with me. And, I think there's only so much the American people are going to take. And it goes all the way back to the Declaration of Independence. People are disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. But when the American people realize that they did not actually choose the government that takes their money and sends their children off to die in foreign wars, I think that's going to be the breaking point. I can't imagine any American being willing to sit still, realizing that democracy is only an illusion in this country. And I think people are getting very, very angry out there. And again, I would like to avoid a bloody revolution in the streets of America, because the wrong people get killed and crippled in these things. But I think when the people simply stop supporting the government, it's going to collapse the way the Soviet Union did.
I hope you're right. And I hope it's a love-illusion, okay? Because, you know, what drives me is that, you know, I had a heart attack 5 years ago after doing this for many years. And I became very spiritual after that. And, you know, what I've learned to do, and I try to teach other people to do, is to believe in the old Lakota prayer. Learn how to love beyond your fear. Realize that fear is a prison and love is the exit. And if you can sustain yourself by that kind of moral fiber, to go ahead, I teach the 7 C's: character, capacity, credibility, civility, citizen, country, and the most important one, the number 7th, is the courage to stand up and say no more. And if a guy like me can do it, I think a lot of people are, and I'm meeting them all over the place. After 12 years, I'm seeing a tipping point. Are you?
I absolutely am. I think people are standing up and realizing that they are courageous enough to take on the corrupt system. We have to take a break for commercial. Thank you very much for spending time with us today, John. Good luck with the future, and please keep me informed about what's going on. I've posted your website, or rather a link to your website from mine. We'll be back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We've got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but first we have a couple of stories. I did go over to Black Box Voting, and I found the story that Bev Harris put out just today called Fraction Magic, and basically revealing that inside the GEMS election software system, votes are counted as fractional numbers rather than integers. In other words, there can be a vote that's 1.1, which is ridiculous. And apparently this was done to expedite being able to shift elections by fractional amounts of points without having to worry about the integer math. And then, of course, the numbers are rounded off to integers prior to the final report being made. There is no legitimate reason to count votes as non-integer numbers. This is more proof of absolute fraud. And not surprisingly, we are already getting reports from Indiana, complaints about voting machines. People are voting for Trump, and their vote flips over to Ted Cruz. Apparently, it's all over the state. Trump is sending out social media to all of his people. Double check that the vote is what you think it is. And we have been seeing this we saw it down again in Arizona. We saw it in Texas. People voting for Trump, and it flips to Cruz, the Canadian. Maybe we should call this the Canadian Shuffle or something like that. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Ralph in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for waiting all this time.
Mike, I want to ask you a question. What would a Donald Trump presidency would be like with a faulty real estate economy? Because I am walking into a lot of mega mansions upstate New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and I have a friend of mine who's a high potential, who's a real estate broker for Coldwell Banker, and I'm just riding around with this person showing me a lot of mega mansions, and I'm walking in these properties, and they're like ghosts. They're like haunted mansions. What's your opinion on all this?
Well, we know that there's been another real estate bubble, and probably a lot of the people who own those mansions are getting out of them now to preserve their investment. And I would say that, we're seeing the beginnings of another real estate crash. Now, as far as Donald Trump being president, he's going to be different, and we need different. We cannot vote the same caliber of candidates into the White House and the Congress. Exactly. We just can't. We simply cannot do that.
A lot of them are just leaving outside the United States, and they're going to Dubai, going to Qatar, going to the Cook Islands, and these are just hearing inside stories that they're just leaving them. These big $14 to $15 million homes, these big mega mansions, and they're putting them on YouTube to see who could buy them, and no one's buying them. It's amazing.
Well, probably, I would imagine the 1% are seriously thinking about relocating outside the country, because if there is an economic crash and we run out of food, we're going to start eating the rich, because they taste like chicken and they're not radioactive and they're not GMO.
And how about the inner cities? They're buying all these condos and condominiums, and they have them in safety deposit boxes, and they're not even living in them. Also, what's the story with that? What's your opinion on that?
Well, most of those inner city condos and everything, and even a lot of suburban homes, are being bought as rental properties. And that's why home purchases by ordinary Americans are in decline, and they keep saying there's a shrinking inventory. No, there's a lot of homes out there coming out of the foreclosure process, but they're all being snapped up as rental properties. And again, we're seeing the end of the American dream of private home ownership, and we're going back to an age of feudalism and serfdom, where the ultra-rich own everything, and we just have to work our entire lives for their permission to stay in their home or work in their factory or farm their field. And that's not democracy, and it's not America.
So millennials are also going to take a huge effect on this also, right?
The millennials are in serious trouble. They can't they can't find decent paying jobs. They're deeply in debt from their student loans. They got rooked. College was diverted from the purpose of higher education into being just another way of plunging people onto that debt hook.
Right. Well, but I mean, I'm just kind of curious. So this is the main purpose why they're building micro-sized apartments in the inner cities also. So they realize that that millennials will never get married also. That's another question also due to the economy, right?
I imagine that they're probably thinking even married couples who don't have the money for anything larger are going to be renting those micro apartments. It's going to come down to a choice. You will live in that micro apartment. It's basically a closet with a toilet and a phone, or you're on the streets. And given that choice, this is the end of the American dream. This is how the New World Order wants you to live. You basically get a little closet to stay in, and the rest of the time you're either at your workplace or your shopping mall. Thank you for the phone call, Ralph. We're going to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Indiana is in this weird sort of twilight zone because they straddle one of the time zone lines, and so part of the state, the polls have already closed. We're starting to get results. Donald Trump, 52%, Ted Cruz, 33%. So the night is still young. It can go anywhere. I'm very concerned about these reports that the electronic voting machines, again, are switching votes for Donald Trump to Ted Cruz. And we're not talking an isolated incident. It's been happening in state after state after state. And we're going to have to get rid of those electronic vote-stealing machines any way we can. I imagine there's a sale on sledgehammers down at the local hardware store. All righty, let's get on back here. So we already talked about the vote switching going on. Getting back to the science and health issues, Johnson & Johnson has lost a second lawsuit regarding their talcum powder causing cancer. And they've been ordered to pay $55 million to this woman who got cancer from the product. And the reason the payments are so high is because apparently Johnson & Johnson knew there was an issue with the ingredients in this powder, but didn't change it. And so they're now in serious trouble. And we know about Johnson & Johnson's skullduggery from Michelle Rosen and that whole Tylenol case, where they knew the Tylenol had been poisoned inside Johnson & Johnson's supply chain, and they concocted this whole story about, it was a crazed lone nut out there in the drugstore itself, which got Johnson & Johnson off the hook, and cursed the rest of us with these little safety tamper seals that tear underneath our fingernails every time we try and open a bottle of vitamin pills. Article coming out of Natural News. The real vaccine scam is not that they cause autism, but that they don't even work. And that is even going beyond that. We're seeing in examples like this recent situation in Harvard, they're causing the illnesses. A bunch of people at Harvard University came down with mumps. And, of course, the pharmaceutical companies and the media said, this is why you must have the mumps vaccine. There's a mumps outbreak at Harvard. Get your vaccine now. And then it turned out all the kids at Harvard who came down with mumps had just had the vaccine shot. They're making money by keeping you sick. And that is, I think, the ultimate expression of descent into outright fascism. Now, we know a lot of chemicals are harmful, and a lot of people are concerned about autism. It has exploded. When I was a kid, 1 in 10,000 kids got autism, something absurd like that. Today, it's 1 out of every 60. Virtually everybody knows a family with one autistic child. Just happened to a friend of ours. And the same story we got from Robert De Niro and some of these other people. Perfectly healthy child. Got the first round of mandated vaccines, spiked a fever, all of a sudden autistic. But apparently, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, aerial spraying for mosquitoes since 2003 has been contributing to autism as well. Or maybe they're just trying to get the vaccine companies off the hook. kind of hard to know where to go with this anymore. Patriot Rising is reporting on a new study that says doctors are overprescribing antibiotics. 30% of antibiotics prescriptions are completely unnecessary. But they make money. They make lots of money, and that makes everything all hunky-dory. Now, there's an alarming story coming out of Germany. Now, not too long ago, there was a story about how a German nuclear reactor found viruses on its computer systems in its office space. And they came out and said, nothing to worry about because the computers that run the reactor itself are not connected to the net. They're air-gapped. But we know from Iran's experience that malware intended to harm a reactor can be taken in by a compromised worker and installed using a flash drive. Back during Operation Desert Storm, Iraq's military computer system crashed when the attack started, even though it too was isolated from the internet. And it turned out how that had been brought about is the NSA intercepted a shipment of a Hewlett-Packard office printer that was going to Iraq's defense ministry, and they added inside it a little microcomputer that once it was plugged into the internet, went out and compromised their computers and awaited a signal to take it all down. Very sneaky people. Now, the reason I mention this about the German reactor is because there's a story that came out of alleged apparent WordPress.com reporting on how air detectors in Germany have detected a release of tellurium-132 in northern Germany. And the reason this is of concern is because tellurium-132 has a half-life of only 3.2 days. If you have a mass of tellurium-132, in 3.2 days, half of that mass has decayed to something else. In another 3.2 days, another half has decayed. That basically means there is something making this tellurium-132. In other words, this is a telltale sign of a leaking, active nuclear reactor. They don't know which one. The airborne detectors, they're in the wind and they're just catching these sniffs. We all of a sudden seem to be having with all these problems with reactors. Many of them have been allowed to operate well past their lifespan designs. Now, when you build a nuclear reactor, it has an expected lifespan, a usable life, usually about 30 years. And the reason for that is very, very simple. Under the intense neutron bombardment, the metal in the containment vessel and the primary coolant loop begins to turn brittle. And they overbuild it at the start so it can withstand that. But after so much neutron flux, it's basically assumed the metal is no longer able to contain the intense high pressures of that primary cooling loop, and the reactor is retired. Unfortunately, because of economic necessity, a lot of nuclear reactors are recertified to extend their lifespan. We have many of those here in the United States of America. As we saw out in San Onofre, a lot of times the reactor operators are fudging the records. San Onofre told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that they were just doing maintenance on the secondary heat exchangers. And what it turned out they were doing is they were putting in all new ones, larger capacity to generate more electricity and make more money. The problem is that some money junkie somewhere along the line changed the specification for the heat transfer tubes to a less expensive material that corroded and failed after just a few years. And now that reactor is completely offline. Complete write-off on that one. Turning over to Chernobyl, tests are showing that milk being sold near Chernobyl is still contaminated with cesium 30 years after the Chernobyl meltdown. Cesium persists for hundreds of years. Some of the fission byproducts are gone in just a couple of days. Others will last for a very long time. Depleted uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. Now, over in Israel, at the Dimona reactor, the weapons factory that we're all supposed to pretend doesn't exist, Their reactor has 1,537 known defects. It has been leaking radiation into the soil around itself for years now. But there's nothing but a bunch of Bedouins living there, and who cares about them right here? Now, we've been talking a lot about the Santa Susana laboratory complex in Los Angeles. This is a laboratory complex was used for a wide variety of experiments and developments. Very, very top secret place. Rocketdyne was testing rocket engines for Apollo and for other applications up there. In fact, when I lived in Southern California, we could hear them when they were testing those rocket engines, all the way where we live, down in North Hollywood. And it's heavily contaminated. It's one of the most toxic contaminated areas in the United States of America. There have been experimental nuclear reactors up there. One of them had a sodium core primary loop. These are very dangerous and unstable. The Russians tried playing with them, but abandoned it, because a sodium reactor, you have to keep that primary loop constantly hot and molten. If it ever cools and solidifies, the reactor's a write-off. And Russia's abandoned playing with those things. The justification for the sodium cool reactor was faster heat transfer from the reactor core to the secondary heat transfer loop. And apparently there is a big stink going on here where former workers at this Santa Susana Field laboratory were refused state compensation for the cancers and leukemias they picked up working there in order to keep that nuclear site secret from the nearby residential areas. People were living next to this thing and didn't realize there was a reactor meltdown going on there. And all these biological weapons chemicals poured into the ground. And the reason this is of concern is because this Santa Susana laboratory zone with all this contaminated soil is right next to those underground gas storage wells that have been leaking recently. They had that one big leak. They plugged it, told everybody everything was safe. The people moved back in. They're still getting sick. Now there's another one of those wells that is starting to leak. And who knows what contamination from Santa Susana is being poured out into the air. What a reckless, reckless way to be running a nation here. Now, for those of you who are geology fans, and I am one, there's been a volcanic earthquake swarm and lake heating observed in Raupehu, New Zealand. And they're concerned that this may be the beginning of an increase in seismic activity, given what's been going on in Japan and along the west coast of South America. There's been a quake right in the heart of the New Madrid Fault here in the United States of America. And there's concern that fracking may be loosening up that fault. Now, everybody who lives in the United States, when they think of earthquakes, they think of California, the big one out there. But the largest earthquake in U.S. history happened in that New Madrid Fault, in that whole central Appalachian area. It was a magnitude 8. It actually had the Mississippi River flowing backwards for a while from all the shaking. And it's ready to go again. And I cannot tell you how dangerous it is for these fracking wells to be pumping liquids down into fault structures, because we know it causes earthquakes. Oklahoma, earthquakes are becoming a regular daily occurrence. And yes, it's linked to the fracking. The reason we knew that was going to be a problem goes all the way out to 29 Palms and the Marine Station that's out there. And several years ago, the Marines got the idea of disposing of some contaminated water and oil and other liquids by pumping them down into this crack in the ground, an earthquake fault. And they started pumping and pumping and pumping, and all of a sudden 29 Palms started getting earthquakes. Because, yeah, when you're pumping liquids into an earthquake fault, it's like that hydraulic jack on the bottom of the service station. It's going to push the car up or push the fault apart, reduce friction, and it's a lubricant. And that's why fracking leads to quakes. Now, the reason this is an issue is because over in Colorado, some of the cities have been declaring citywide bans on fracking. They're not as concerned about earthquakes out there. Colorado doesn't have a lot of faults. They got a few, but not very many. They're concerned about groundwater contamination. which is a problem. The Colorado State Supreme Court has just ruled that the state government can override city fracking bans. So the Colorado State Capitol can say you have to allow fracking in your town, and the towns are now ordered to do so by the Colorado Supreme Court. Have you ever seen a more corrupt age? Have you ever seen a government less concerned with the health and safety of its own citizens? It's like we were talking about yesterday. The Obama administration is allocating more money for the illegal immigrant children coming into this country over the border than for our own Social Security recipients. It tells you what their priorities are. Now, a past president of the American Public Health Association, Dr. Walter Sue, is out there reporting that they did a study. Cattle that drank water contaminated by fracking fluid died just an hour after drinking it. That wastewater is highly toxic. Now, my thought would be, if you're going to frack in the first place, just use fresh water to do it. Because if you're pumping fresh water into the ground and it comes back up, it's still fresh water. Yes, it's bringing some things up from deep under the earth, like hexane and radon, that we probably should be leery of. But the fracking fluid is this toxic soup of all kinds of chemicals designed to dissolve rock. And if it's going to dissolve rock, what happens to you when you drink it? What does it do to your teeth and your bones? Worse, and we did have a former employee of a fracking company call into the show and confirm this. The fracking companies have made deals with other corporations that produce toxic waste that can't be disposed of anywhere else. And they mix it in with the fracking fluid and they pump it deep into the ground and say, see, it's all gone, you'll never see it again. Except it does percolate up. And it gets into the drinking water. 2 of California's 3 major aquifers are contaminated with fracking fluid now. When that methane bubbles up through lakes and ponds and streams, it decomposes into carbon dioxide and water molecules, and in the process takes all of the molecular oxygen out of the water. That's why these fish are dying all over the place. We do not have good government in this country. We have looters and plunderers and pillagers. And that's it. And they're treating the American people pretty much the same way they treat the people in Iraq or Syria or Libya. We're just there to be made money off of. It's kind of a step down here. Okay, let's see if we've got any new numbers. 3% reporting. Donald Trump is still at 54%. Cruz is doing better than the last polls going in, but again, we already know there's cheating going on. There's already fraud going on with those electronic machines. I'm still concerned about how Indiana shattered their early voting record, because it's those mail-in ballots where so much fraud takes place. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're following the first reports coming out of Indiana. Of course, the rest of the polls are going to close just as we're ending our show, and things could change dramatically. But with 4% of the precincts reporting, Donald Trump is at 53.6%, Ted Cruz 33%, John Kasich at 10.4%, and we are getting more reports of shenanigans going on with the Indiana primary. Apparently some polling places closed early. Fewer polling stations in the precincts, the same thing we've been seeing down in Arizona. If it's a precinct that's going to favor Donald Trump, we just somehow lose the ballots and shut things down. Along with those reports that the electronic machines are switching the votes over. This election is completely crooked. The crookedest I've ever seen, and I've been paying attention for a lot of years. Okay, getting on back to the science and health news. Story coming out of Patriot Rising. Researchers from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine have found that deaths from medical mistakes are now the 3rd leading cause of death. Medical errors by the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists, the lab techs, may be responsible for more than 250,000 deaths annually of the American people. But you should be afraid of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then they wonder why we don't want to go to the doctor's office. Third leading cause of death, the doctors making mistakes. Now, over in the European Union, they're getting ready to pass a... I'm having to communicate with the control room. I'm still getting used to the new old setup here. The European Union is passing a rule where they are going to issue everybody who uses computers an ID. And when you log into a website for any purpose, anywhere, you will have to log in with your ID, supposedly for security. No, this is for tracking and spying, because the cyber criminals are just going to fake the necessary ID or steal an ID. This is another one of those harebrained situations where they look like they're doing something that's good, and it's going to be completely, totally ineffective. Have you noticed they're treating the law-abiding citizens like we're the criminals, and they're treating the criminals like they're golden, like they're family and we can't touch them? Yes, he's bad, but he's my cousin and we can't do anything about that. Now, there's been a big stink about a new situation coming out of Clear Channel from their billboard division, where the billboards are now equipped to listen to your cell phone, find out who you are, access a database, and put up an appropriate advertisement. It's almost like the movie Minority Report, where wherever you go, you are shown appropriate ads. Now, I don't have a problem with that aspect of it. I don't want to look at ads for things I'm not interested in, but, okay, there does have to be a unique identifier, which means it is used for spying. And the problem I have here is people who are with you are going to get insights into your personal life just by seeing what ads you are being shown. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. Thanks to everybody who is donating to keep us up and running and our equipment new and healthy. Aloha, America.